What did we learn from the Keith Pelley press conference about the future of the Leafs franchise? And a bombshell Knicks trade report comes to light. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike Distefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti, not here today. He had a wedding, so he is out celebrating and probably had one too many drinks to be able to come on to record today's show, but that's okay. We're throwing it back to the OG Locked On Leafs days where it's just me, myself, and I, and my microphone and the audience. And hopefully I can entertain you for the next 25 to 30 minutes or so. Got a fun show planned today. Today's episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So we finally heard from Keith Pelley, the president of MLSE, the man who ultimately made the decision to move on from Brendan Shanahan, and we got to hear from him. So I'll break down the news and notes from what I heard from Keith Pelley and what I believe, what his words mean in terms of what it means for the organization moving forward. There was a crazy report coming out of the Agent Provocateur podcast, which is the Alan Walsh podcast on SDPN, with a reported big-time trade that Kyle Dubas had in the cooker, and it was nixed by Brendan Shanahan. And that's a very interesting discussion that we can get into a little bit later today. And we'll get into some final news and notes around the NHL. The Carolina Hurricanes are on life support heading into a game 4 tonight. You got the Oilers up 2-1 in their series. So we'll talk a little bit about what else is going on around the league later in the show. But let's kick things off with Keith Pelley's press conference from Friday afternoon. I think a few of the more key important parts of it that I took away is obviously Keith Pelley did mention that he will not be replacing Brendan Shanahan. So there will not be an ongoing search to find a new president of hockey operations for the Toronto Maple Leafs. It appears that Keith Pelley will be a little bit more hands-on, but he did say that he will not be making the hockey decisions. That will be made by Brad Treliving. So Treliving takes on a little bit more responsibility. It's a little more of a streamlined situation where now he no longer has to go through Shanahan, the middleman, to go to the board or to go to Keith Pelley to make those big executive decisions when it comes to the moves and the contracts and money that is made for the Leafs. And in a little bit, we'll talk about how sometimes the middleman does make a big deal and difference when some trades get nixed. But for now, it appears that the Maple Leafs will not be replacing Shanahan. They will not go into next season with the president of hockey operations, and it'll be kind of Keith Pelley, and I believe he's going to appoint some people from within to take on some of the duties that Shanahan had, some of the off-ice stuff, because Keith Pelley did talk about some of the things that Shanny brought to the table. He talked about how he felt the alumni certainly were in a much better spot. The relationship with the alumni was in a better spot, and that was, brought forward by Brendan Shanahan. A lot of the programs that he set in place. There was this fan access program, which I actually didn't know was even going on. Maybe some of you guys did, but apparently the Maple Leafs were giving away 150 tickets per game away to fans. in the playoffs. So, this fan access program I assume they're going to keep it moving forward, considering Keith Pelley literally talked about it. But they're giving away tickets to fans, and the real fans, not the suits. So you're getting at least an extra 150 screaming fans into the building each and every game. That's going to help build a relationship. And I think that was something that Keith Pelley harped on as well, was the need to mend the relationship with the fan base and the team and the fans and the team and the media. Like he talked about how there's for some reason some rift between the fans and the team, and a lot of that is really due to the fact that it just feels like these guys have been coddled for a very long time, and there's it's not that they're not likable, there's just I don't know, they're not all that relatable. Like, there's just not a chance to get to know these guys. They don't really do a lot of local media. You don't see them, with massive presence online, doing podcasts, so there's just not a massive way to get to know these people. And I wonder if that's going to change with Pelley. I wonder if he says, yeah, we got to market our players a little bit better and make them more accessible to the public, make them more accessible to the media so that we can improve our relationship with the fan base. Because that was something, again, that he said was really important, that's what he wants to do. Mentioned that this fan access program, the age demographic was about 15 years younger than the season ticket holder demographic. So, that's really good. That obviously means that there's a new, younger generation that of Leaf fandom out there. So you continue to, have prolonged fandom out there. So that's good. It's not like the team's going to fold up shop or the team's not going to find fans at some point, but I do think that Keith Pelley is on the right path at the very least. I will say that. He did acknowledge that further change will probably be needed to get the team to the next level, and replacing Shanahan or moving on from Shanahan was a step in that direction. This was when asked about the pending UFAs. And of course, he didn't necessarily have an answer when it comes to that. He decided to essentially not to talk about the unrestricted free agents. Didn't want to talk about Mitch, didn't want to talk about Tavares. And essentially he just said, yeah, further change probably be needed, but we're not going to talk about that today, which is fair. I guess he did mention that, again, those hockey decisions will be made by Brad Treliving, the general manager of the club, not by Keith Pelley. So when we hear from Treliving, which should be any time now, Keith Pelley mentioned that, I guess, Treliving had his daughter's graduation back in Calgary, high school graduation. So that was the reason why he wasn't able to attend to speak with Pelley or do his own session last week, but should be speaking at some point this week. I'd imagine that information will come out shortly. But here's what I thought was probably the most notable of what Keith Pelley had to say in a press conference. And I'll tell you guys on the other side. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll finish up with my final thoughts on the Keith Pelley press conference and what's next maybe for Brendan Shanahan, not going to the Islanders, but we've kind of heard that before. I don't know, but we'll get into that bombshell trade report that was nixed by Shanny. That's still to come. And what else is happening around the NHL? Easton Cowan lighting it up for the Knights in the Mem Cup Championship. All that more next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you just stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and I save more. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch Money to check on all of your finances, track your spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike Distefano here with you. Dave Morsuti, unable to make the show today. He was at a wedding, so he's having a lot of fun. So hopefully he is boogieing on the dance floor. I know he can bust a move, so I'm sure he's out there cutting rug up out on the dance floor right now. So we'll get to this bombshell trade report in just a moment. Alan Walsh of Agent Provocateur, the very vocal hockey agent, apparently there was a deal in place that Marc-Andre Fleury was nearly a Maple Leaf. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. But I want to put a bow on Keith Pelley's press conference, and maybe one of the best things that I heard, or most positive things that I heard, is he made the statement, good simply isn't good enough. And if you're a fan of the team, you got to love that, because yes, this has been a very good team over the course of the last 9 years. That's what they've been. They've been a good team, right? In the regular season, they've been able to win a lot of games, put up a lot of points, score a lot of goals. It's been a good team, but it hasn't been a great team. Great teams know how to win in the postseason. I think that is where Keith Pelley wants to bring this team. Obviously wants to deliver a championship, and ultimately, it was in his original statement when he let go of Brendan Shanahan, that the next chapter in Maple Leafs history, these decisions are being made to deliver another championship to the Toronto Maple Leafs, one that not that I have to remind anyone, has not been won since 1967. But he said he's committed to winning, and for this upcoming season, it's not that necessarily he believes the team needs to win a Stanley Cup this year, but does need to see a path to winning, needs to see a path to success. And I would say this past year, I think it probably was you saw a path. I would say, like, this year more than any other year, with Craig Berube in tow, with Brad Treliving bringing in a plethora of playoff battle-tested type of players. I think there was a path, and so whether or not it's fair to let go of Shanahan when you did see a path, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I think there is a path, and I love that he's committed to winning, and he reiterated that. And just saying that good isn't good enough is exactly what I wanted to hear, quite honestly. Because there's the thought that, this team must be happy with, being able to sell all the tickets that they do, all the jerseys that they do, all the merchandise that they make. Like, they don't have to be a great team and win a Stanley Cup in order to make all the money in the world. They're perfectly content winning a lot of games, scoring a lot of goals, and then flaming out in the playoffs, but they still are able to make, their buck. Like, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs at the end of the day. It's the hockey mecca of the world, and they're still going to make so much money in merch and ad dollars. But the fact that Keith Pelley's looking at it saying that's not good enough, right? We want to be a great team. We want to win. And that's what you have to be happy to hear if you are a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. So what the team's going to do moving forward, we'll see. As I mentioned earlier, when asked about what his thoughts are, I guess, on the on ice product, on the team itself, on what they should do this summer with John Tavares and Mitch Marner, he didn't necessarily want to get into any of that, but again, did say further change will probably be needed to get us to that next level, and then mentioned that the Shanahan decision was part of a step in that right direction. So whether or not further change means not, bringing back Mitch Marner as well, whether it means making, further changes within off ice things. Like the team's got a billion AGMs. Maybe they want to streamline things and make it a little more tighter in there. Like maybe it's a too many cooks in the kitchen situation. Perhaps it means that they want that, do they move out of a Morgan Riley? Is that conversation, pop up at some point here? Like this is now the third regime that is in place post Morgan Riley's draft. So, do they want to keep it going here with him, considering that his play kind of fell off a little bit towards the end of the year? And really, I don't know, last couple of years, it's fallen off. So that's a conversation that I'm sure will be had as well. But overall, I think that it is a great statement to hear from Keith Pelley to say good simply isn't good enough. And he wants to make sure that this team is built to be great. And, that's what wins in the playoffs, right? Greatness is what wins in the playoffs. We're seeing that right now with the Florida Panthers. And you saw in Game 7 and Game 5 that the Maple Leafs just quite aren't there yet. They're still a little ways away from being that team. And that's really what they got to get to, right? And it's not that they don't have the skill level. It's not that they don't have the grit. I truly believe that this team is built well, and that it is somewhat between the heads and between the ears, and maybe they can get it done in a different way. But I do believe that there was signs that this team can win. You saw that in Game 6, right? When they play to their structure, when they play to their capabilities, this can be a winning hockey team. They just got to do it on a more consistent basis. That's what's so great about the Florida Panthers. They play their game each and every night, no matter what. Guys go down, guys get hurt, and they continue. Whoever fills in continues to play, that structure, that style. And it's been a successful recipe. They're one game away tonight, one win away from their third straight trip to the Stanley Cup final. So, it's a copycat league, and there's some things to take away, and it's that relentlessness. And I believe that Brad Treliving will probably be looking to build a team very similar to that. And I mean, he grabbed 3 players off that championship team last year: Steven Lorentz, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and Anthony Stolarz. So he already dipped into that talent pool a couple of times. We'll see moving forward this offseason if they dip into it again. I know there's been a lot of chatter about this Sam Bennett character, and possibly could he be, the missing piece, the type of player that Toronto needs here in Toronto, here in the Maple Leafs, to go from a good to great team. Again, that's a discussion that we can have throughout the next couple of weeks here leading up to free agency. But that's the fact that Keith Pelley acknowledges that it's been a good team, but good isn't good enough, and they want to be a great team, and they want to win a championship, is pretty well exactly what I wanted to hear from him. All right. Moving forward, Brendan Shanahan, there was that report last week that the New York Islanders had asked to meet with Shanny, and or they wanted to speak with him at the very least, and the Maple Leafs did let him do that. And I assume that was because they had already made the decision internally that they were not going to bring him back. I'm not sure he ends up getting the job in New York, though. They already went out and hired a general manager. They went out and they hired Matthew Darsh, who was the Tampa Bay Lightning AGM for many years. And he's been like a GM in waiting for a bit now. I think a lot of people expected him to eventually get a job with how well things have gone in Tampa Bay. But Brendan Shanahan, it's interesting. Will they bother? Like, it's just strange that they made a GM decision prior to bringing in a president, if that's what they're going to do, right? Like, I don't know. It would be very weird, I guess, for Shanny to come in and not be able to have a say in appointing his general manager. So that's where I look at that, and I'm thinking, maybe they just decided not to go in the Shanny direction, and they're just, maybe they'll also just go without a president. Like, it's not a foreign concept to not have a president of hockey operations like that. There's a lot of teams out there that do not have a president of hockey operations, right? So it's possible that they could just go without replacing Lou Lamoriello, and Shanny doesn't end up on the island. Where does he end up? I'm not sure. Maybe he takes a little time off. Maybe he goes back to, working for the league, perhaps. Remember, he was part of the Department of Player Safety prior to coming to the Maple Leafs. So maybe there's a role there for him in New York. Or possibly he just takes some time off and waits for the right opportunity to to present itself. Maybe he latches on, attaches himself to Steve Yzerman, and maybe he goes back to Detroit where he had success. Maybe possibly the Devils could be looking for somewhere where Shanahan has success and a foothold in that organization, obviously with his playing days. But as for now, it doesn't appear like there's a lot cooking for Brendan Shanahan. Now we've heard that before, though, right? We've heard that before. Kyle Dubas did say that he was gonna take some time off and didn't plan on popping up anywhere anytime soon after being let go by the Maple Leafs, and then a couple weeks later, a few $1 million changed his mind pretty quickly, and he ended up in Pittsburgh. Speaking of Kyle Dubas, there was a report the other day. Alan Walsh on Agent Provocateur, a podcast from the Steve Dangle Podcast Network, SDPN. Alan Walsh he's the agent of Marc-Andre Fleury. And a couple of years ago, I do recall this report being out there that there was a deal that was being discussed between the Maple Leafs and the Chicago Blackhawks when Fleury was part of the Blackhawks. I think this was sort of like 21 or 22 or something like that. And maybe even 23. But anyways, and there was I recall this was at the time Brandon Hagel was a RFA, and he was also being linked as part of the deal. So it was a trade that would have landed Marc-Andre Fleury and Brandon Hagel. And Alan Walsh basically said that Dubas had called him and told him that it was basically a done deal. Wanted to know, if Fleury would be interested. And I guess Fleury had gotten to a point where he said, yes, I'd be interested in playing, waiving my no trade to go to Toronto. And Dubas just said, all right, I got to take this upstairs, get the final send off, and then we should be able to make this deal. Apparently, Brendan Shanahan or whoever, but it was nixed by the people upstairs, the people above Kyle Dubas, nixed the deal that would have landed them at Marc-Andre Fleury, a franchise goaltender, and Brandon Hagel, who's a very good player, I might add. I recall Brendan Nyes. I remember Matthew Nyes being part of the package in that reported deal. Nyes and some futures, like first round pick and stuff. So looking back on it, considering what Nyes has become, and granted, Brandon Hagel is every bit as good as a player as Matthew Nyes, I suppose. The guy had 38 goals this year, Team Canada at the Four Nations. Like, Hagel's a pretty darn good player himself, so it could have worked out. And then Marc-Andre Fleury, right? How long this team has looked for that, number one goaltender. It could have worked out, I suppose. We'll never know. But I think you can look at that now and maybe you are thanking Shanahan just based on what Nyes has become. Like, he's really become a focal point of this team, and he brings an element that this team simply just doesn't have or hasn't had in the past. Like, Hagel does bring a little bit of that P and V, like we saw him drop the mitts at the the hockey championship, at the Four Nations championship with Matt Tkachuk to start things off in that Canada-US battle. So it's not as though Brandon Hagel doesn't have, that nature in him. But Nyes has been a hell of a player, and he's going to be for a very long time. Much younger player as well. So I maybe that was a win for Brendan Shanahan. When we look back on, what good things did Shanny do over the course of his tenure here in Toronto, maybe that was for the better to keep Matthew Nyes in the fold, if that was the reported deal. But I thought that was very interesting. I will mention also that this report was kind of quashed a little bit by both Elliot Friedman and Darren Dreger. on their respective podcast, but I don't know. Alan Walsh has no reason to lie. I'm not saying he is, or I'm not saying anything, but this was a report from Alan Walsh's mouth himself on his own podcast. So we'll see if anything else comes from this. I'm sure it's like 3-4 years old now. This is old news at this point, but just thought it was interesting to bring to your attention. All right. On the other side, we'll get into some NHL news and notes. Easton Cowan lighting it up for London. Maple Leafs top prospect. We'll tell you all about what he's been up to this playoffs as the Memorial Cup opened up this weekend. And we got both conference finals series, rocking and rolling. And sounds like the Florida Panthers could be making their third straight trip to the Stanley Cup playoffs. We'll get to that and more next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Before I continue, I do want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by Farm to Fork. If you're a fan of premium locally farmed meats delivered straight to your door, I've got some exciting news. Farm to Fork makes it easy to get high-quality steaks, air-chilled chicken, wild-caught seafood, and more, all with no antibiotics, hormones, or GMOs. Plus, everything comes flash-frozen and individually packaged for your convenience. All Farm to Fork meats are raised on Canadian farms, so when you order, you're supporting local producers. It's time to buy Canadian. Farm to Fork's meats are top notch. I've had some amazing steaks that were tender, juicy, and perfectly cooked. Their chicken is air chilled, so it's fresher and more flavorful than what you get in the store. They're delivering it all across Ontario and Western Quebec. And the best part, delivery is free with a minimum order of $199. You don't even have to leave the house to get this quality. I've got a special code just for you Locked On Leafs listeners. Use Locked On 40. You'll get $40 off your first order at Farm to Fork. Visit farmtoforkdelivery.ca to start stocking up on the best meats around. Again, that's Locked On 40 for $40 off your first order. Farm to Fork, delicious, locally farmed meats delivered straight to your door. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike Distefano with you. Dave Morsuti will be back tomorrow. He's enjoying himself out at a wedding. Just a reminder that the Locked On Leafs podcast is free and available all off season long. We do not take a break. We keep it going all the way through the playoffs, through draft, through free agency, and through the summer. Yes, you want to rock. Come by sometime mid-August. We'll still be chatting Maple Leafs each and every day here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and also up on YouTube. Easton Cowan, Toronto Maple Leafs #1 prospect, is doing some big things down in London. They ended up winning the OHL championship and advanced into the Memorial Cup, where again, this team doing pretty well. They won their first game. Easton Cowan's a year away from being in the Maple Leafs. He had an opportunity to make the team this year, but obviously, they felt one more season to season up in the Ontario Hockey League might be better off for Easton Cowan. He ended up going to play for Team Canada at the World Junior Championships. The regular season, in terms of points, was not as productive as last year was. He had 69 points in 46 games, whereas this, a year ago, he had 96 points in 54 games. So a little bit of a drop off, but this guy really came alive in the playoffs. Like, that is where he started to make his money here. He had 13 goals, 26 points, 26 assists for 39 points in just 17 games. This guy's averaging over 2 points per game for the London Knights here in the playoffs. And considering that this Maple Leafs team does not have a lot of playoff performers and they seem to fade when the lights come on here, this got to be incredibly positive for the Maple Leafs to look at this and think, oh my goodness, we may have a playoff performer right here in front of us. So you talk about, there could be some guys who are out the door next year. Well, this guy's going to be stepping in the door, and he's done with the OHL after next season. He's aged out. It's either NHL or AHL, and Easton Cowan, I think, is ready for the NHL, and he's put on a little bit more weight. He's up to like a buck 85, maybe he can get to a buck 90. By the time he puts in another summer, big off season for him. Um, and man, like again, 39 points in 17 playoff games this year, just continues to elevate his game when it matters most. He's trying to win another OHL title. I I'm excited for the prospect of Easton Cowan and what he can be for this Maple Leafs team. And he can come in and really help, solidify, in the middle six area. Again, if John Tavares and Mitch Marner both decide to walk, or if the Leafs decide to just go in a different direction, you have someone who might be able to come in, and Cowan's not going to be Mitch Marner. He's not going to be John Tavares. He's not going to replace them one for one, obviously. But you do have someone who can come in and maybe give you a little something on the second line. Eventually, maybe not year one, but you see eventually you've got, a top 6 point producing player on your hands here who can play, a 200-foot game. So I like what we're seeing at Easton Cowan. I think it's very, very encouraging for the Maple Leafs and what he's been able to do. So he, along with his London Knights teammates, vying for a Memorial Cup championship. Again, that's taking place. It's underway now over on I think it's a TSN property, so you can watch the Memorial Cup games across the TSN network all week long. Some NHL news and notes. So we've got our final 4 underway. The Carolina Hurricanes are up against it. I mean, they are down 3-0 in the series and on the verge of being swept again. 4 straight times. If they lose tonight, game 4 is tonight. If they lose this one, that'll be 4 straight trips to the conference finals with a combined 0 wins. They've lost 15 straight conference finals games. They've been swept 3 times in a row on the verge of a 4th. I don't even know how it's possible that's happened, but I think it does happen, to be honest with you. Like you watched the game the other night. Was it Saturday? I believe the Florida Carolina game. I mean, that game was they by the third period, the life was out. The lights were out on the Carolina Hurricanes. I mean, every time I looked, it seemed like they were scoring another goal. It was like 3-1 and 4-1 and 5-1 and 6-1. It was insane. The game was over, and you could tell that the Carolina Hurricanes, I think, knew we can't get past this team. They looked dead in the water. It looked like a team that was defeated, and I'd be surprised if they won a game tonight. I really would. I just think that Florida is so much better. They're mentally sharper, and ultimately, the Canes can't handle what is being thrown at them. The physicality, the forecheck. They're packing the middle of the ice. They're not allowing really anything. I mean, you heard the Hurricanes fans chanting in game 1 and 2, shoot the puck. They can't shoot the puck. And Toronto experienced the exact same thing. That's a very good team defensively. They don't give up a whole lot of scoring chances. And if you're not willing to just shoot it and try and get, a puck to go off a stick, go off a body, have a bad bounce of some kind, you're not going to find many ways to beat Sergei Bobrovsky, who I believe is like a 960 save percentage or 957 save percentage in this series. And Bob Zavold is back, and that is a scary thought for these teams who are still in the playoffs vying for Lord Stanley. And on the west side, the Edmonton Oilers, the lone Canadian team, still cooking. They're up 2-1 in their series. Big win yesterday, 6-1 thumping over the Dallas Stars. And one of the bigger stories, I think, right now is what's going on with Stu Skinner, a guy who really couldn't put his equipment on without giving up 5 goals in the first series. The first few games, he gets yanked. His season was virtually over. They decided to go with Calvin Pickard, and then Pickard goes down midway through the second round, and they're forced to go back to Stuart Skinner based off of injury. And the guy's been unbelievable ever since. Comes out, he's got shutout, lets in 3, and then back-to-back games here where he's been unbelievable for this team here. He's been great. I mean, obviously, but yeah, 6-1 final last night. So he's got 2 shutouts and a 1-goal performance over his last 4 starts. So he's been pretty good, pretty solid for the Edmonton Oilers. And McDavid, a couple goals last night too. So he's starting to heat up in the goals department, and things are clicking for Edmonton, man. We're on a collision course for a repeat of last year's Stanley Cup final. Florida Panthers, Edmonton Oilers. And man, wouldn't it be great to see? I don't know. I'm curious how you guys all feel, to be honest. I still want to see McDavid win a cup. I would love to see the cup come back onto Canadian soil for the first time since 1993. And obviously, I would have loved the Maple Leafs to be the team to break that drought, but the Edmonton Oilers are this year's lone hope to do so. So I'll be jumping on that bandwagon, I suppose. I don't want to see Florida win another championship, and it feels as though the Oilers have the edge right now in that series against the Dallas Stars. Just my thoughts. Curious, get your thoughts down below. All right, that's going to do it for me here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. I will be back with my partner, Dave Morisuti, for another episode tomorrow for you guys. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.